welcome everybody here and in the Zoom land. This is a really momentous day for us because this is something we've been talking about. I mean, you guys have been talking about it as a HR community forever, and I've been talking about it since I got here, which seems like forever. So this is what I will just clean it up to say this is the new PARF. This is the PARF lift. This is the facelift to all the documentation that we require from all of you. Major kudos to the entire team, to Andrea, Workforce Planning, to Leanne, to HR Services, to Jeff, our General Counsel, to everybody who helped bring this pilot to birth this baby, because it should help all of us be more efficient and effective, and then release you to do the things that you should be doing, which is dealing with your people in the agencies. So we're trying to make this as streamlined as possible. I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea, but thank you all for your continued support of introducing new process to make your lives and our lives better and easier, and to make us stronger as an HR community, so we can, again, spend our time doing what's the most important to all of us, which is to take care of our people, to find more people, to retain our people, and to make these kind of processes a smooth and easy function. So thank you to those of you online who tuned in on the Zoom. Thank you, Marco, for coming back up to Santa Fe today to help us on the Zoom world. And I will turn it over to Andrea, but thanks, Andrea.
Okay, so let's get started. This training will be a little different from the last two that we've done, because I want to go over more the function and the reasons behind some of the changes we've made to the PARF, rather than just the form itself, because the form is just a form. Okay, so our objectives for the next hour or so is to kind of talk about why we wanted to do this facelift, talk about your consultant, and I've gotten lots of feedback from our customers, from HR managers about some of their concerns, what our new DFA partnership and process looks like. We'll have a flow chart for you guys to look at, what tools we're going to provide you to assist you in completing the form, or documents that will help you partner with managers so that we get products that are complete and we're not wasting time kind of going back and forth. So we'll talk about that. And then we had I mentioned this at the pay training a couple weeks ago, we had a small pilot group that consisted of one elected official, a couple medium-sized agencies. The larger agencies were DOT and DOH, to kind of look at this form and give their feedback before we presented it to the entire group. So that helped us a lot. And then, of course, presenting it to the entire community will help us, give us feedback on what you think about how realistic this is going to be for you. Okay? Does anyone have questions before I start? No? Okay. So I think the biggest reason for some of the revisions is just the lack of efficiency in some areas, right? So what I see sometimes is HR customers getting frustrated and saying, I've heard this, just tell me what to say. You know what I mean? I need this level of job. What do you need from me? Because depending on who the person is on the other side, meaning SPO, sometimes you get different types of questions, different types of requests for information. And that was the number one thing when I started kind of helping out on this side again, that I would hear, like, we never got asked that before, or why do you want that now? We've been doing it this way for 10 years, or, oh, now Andrea's going to be my consultant. Great. I'm going to have to teach her everything. And I really liked, so-and-so as my consultant. And so I feel like for years that's kind of been going on. When I first got assigned DOT, when I first started working at SPO, they wrote a letter to have Bernadette back, because they really love Bernadette, because she knew their agency. So I always think it's so funny, try not to get my feelings hurt, but those are really important things for agencies, to have that connection and that consultant that they feel really has their back and understands their agency. So part of the lift was, okay, that's important, and that's a big part of being a senior consultant at State Personnel Office, is to understand agencies. But if one of the main feedback that we get is, well, so-and-so knows my agency, that means we're missing something, right? We shouldn't be asking different things, or I shouldn't have all the knowledge in my head and approve something because I know A, B, and C, right? We should be able to have a document that has that information and be able to ask consistent questions. So to me, that's one of the biggest kind of aha moments that we want to try to uncover with the form and the types of questions we ask for the justification, so that we're all asking for the same criteria. And there is no, well, when I went through this analyst, I only needed this for a TSI, and then I just needed this with this person. So that's really our main objective, is to be transparent and say, here are all the things that we're looking at for these specific actions. There is no guesswork. There's nothing that someone else wouldn't say to you, right? So we're trying to eliminate that concern that depending on the person, the justification required varies. Does that sound good to you guys? Do you have any questions about that? But that's really one of the main feedbacks that we get. Even DOH, like Max, you were DOH's consultant, and was the first thing she said, who's my person? Who do I have to teach, right? And so we're like, no, we're trying a new approach so that we hope that we don't have those same concerns. Okay, so DFA partnership. So how we've partnered or worked with DFA for the last 8 or so years has changed, right? So right now you're used to submitting actions separately to the oversight agencies. And last administration, it was really important for you to get DFA approval before you came to SPO, right? Because they would say, why would SPO want to look at it if you have no money? But most of our agencies, especially large machines like a CYFD, a DOH, how many times does something get disapproved or denied? Not very often for most of us, right? So that means that we're waiting to get the DFA approval. Once you get it, then the SPO clock starts ticking. And that is not very efficient, right? Especially for employees who are waiting for certain actions, or managers are waiting for positions so that they can fill them. So that's something that we think we've identified as an opportunity to improve. Like, does it make sense to have them on separate tracks? Does it make sense for an agency to have to wait for DFA, then wait for SPO, right? Because ultimately you're getting a lot of pressure from your agency heads or your leadership because they need things moving. So that was something that was a concern for us. Do you guys have anything else that's kind of like a heartburn or a ping point for the relationship right now, or the process right now? Do you have anything to add besides the 2 tracks? That kind of was like, you don't understand why they're doing it that way, or why we're doing it that way?
I said, why are they doing it that way? That seems like a way to find stuff.
Yeah, and the agency has to track it down, really what's happening. They're like, okay, let me follow up cabinet secretary. I think it's still a DFA, and they're like, oh wait, now I got to send it to SPO and answer all that, their questions based on, you know, what they're looking at, depending on the action. Okay, so I'm gonna open up a flow chart now, Marco, for the individuals that are on Zoom. Okay, so I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I just want to give you an oversight of how this new partnership's going to work. And so here, the section I'm circling, we have shared services. So that's Leanne's group, where she's actually performing HR services just like you guys for a group of, did you say it was 18 agencies last? Oh, was shared services the old? Okay, sorry about that. My bad. HR services. So, but how many agencies? 18, you said, or? Okay, so she's in a similar boat to all of you guys because she's working on behalf of an agency and processing actions. Many of her actions don't require SPO or DFA, some of them do. So their process is right off to the side, but I'm not going to go into that too much, but that's why it's there. So how we want this to work is we want an agency to submit one submittal when they want to submit an action to SPO or DFA, and we want them to do that through the workforce planning email that we have established already, that we're still using for workforce planning, and it's workforce.planning@state.nm.us. So if you had a reclass, you would submit that action to workforce planning. We're going to request that for the reclass, you're going to also submit your budget projections in addition to the classification information at the same time. Our responsibility at SPO will be to assign to the DFA consultant and the SPO consultant so they can start working on your action simultaneously, right? We're going to meet with DFA, with our counterpart, because they have assigned agencies just like our consultants do. And we're going to meet with them frequently about any questions they may have, right? So what we're seeing is sometimes DFA will ask questions and they're very similar to the questions that SPO asks, right? Have any of you experienced that? Like, why are you doing this personnel move, right? Or does the person qualify? So we want to make sure that they have a resource as well so that we can move things forward quickly if they have any process questions about why we do what we do from a personnel standpoint. So we're going to work on the action at the same time and communicate with each other if we have any questions. Sometimes our questions will require us to talk with you guys, right? From a personnel standpoint. I just did that a few minutes before the training started with Tanya because she has a priority request and there was a couple things we needed, and so that's not going to stop. But once we get the approval, DFA will notify us and we will notify the agency once that the action has been approved from both oversight agencies. We'll include the analysts on those approval emails so that everybody's aware. We'll also include information if it's an alternative recommendation. Sometimes that happens a lot with classification work. We might say, oh, it's a management analyst that we're recommending, not a program coordinator one. So we're going to work together in that way, and we're hoping that it makes it easier for you guys to submit your action once to one place, and that we will coordinate back with you when the action has been approved by both oversight agencies. So what we're going to continue to do, because you might be like, well, I need to know where it's at, right? I want to know what's happening with my action. I just don't want to know that it's at workforce planning somewhere. Is we're going to work closely with you to send you information on what's pending on a weekly basis and where it's at as far as what's pending. And we're going to also send that information to our DFA counterparts on a regular basis so that they're aware what we have and how long things are taking to hopefully help speed things up. And that's even going to go all the way up to the secretary and the director level. So they'll be aware on a weekly basis what we have pending when we receive the action, so that we can kind of keep track of, from an oversight standpoint, how efficient we're being and timely we're being with our agencies and their requests. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about that process or that new partnership? Do you like it, or do you think that'd be easier? Do you like having, yeah, okay.
Yes,
yeah.
to one place and then get one approved.
Yeah.
It makes more sense timeline wise.
Yeah, and we're hoping that our partnership with DFA too will help. We can kind of inform each other on process, especially personnel questions that they have. And when we met with DFA to talk about this proposal and kind of our implementation process, they said sometimes agencies will be like, why are you asking me that? SPO asks me that. So, and it's funny because even though they're an oversight agency from a financial standpoint, they still have questions, right? Which is good, but we want to make sure that there's a place and a cadence for those questions so that we're being super efficient. Because if your DFA analyst asks a question and you deal with it and you answer it, and then you give it to SPO and they ask you the same question, that's probably kind of frustrating, right? So it feels like double the work. So we're hoping that that helps.
So a question from the audience out there, they're asking, do they still have their assigned analysts at DFA and SPO, Donna and Drew, PED?
Okay, so DFA just recently sent us, I think it was late last week, their consultant assignments. So we do have that. So we can share that once we implement. SPO has assigned consultants as well. We can also share that.
And then the other question came in, do they change based on when they submit?
Does what change?
Because their assignment to whoever they have at DFA or SPO.
It's my understanding, we just met with DFA a week ago. They run very similar to us. They have a consultant or an analyst that they call them that has assigned agencies, so they don't switch. Sometimes at SPO, depending on the staffing, you might have one or more than one person staffing your agency action. So CYFD is a really good example. Right now, I'm helping them staff their compensation actions, and April's helping them staff some of their classification actions. And so when we were thinking at SPO about revising the process, that was a big thing for us, right? So we looked at data, we looked at assignments. It's not just about, oh, Max Rodriguez is assigned DOH. We can clearly see that's not an even distribution of work. So how do we look at work in a different way? How do we break up actions depending on their complexity and the level of analysis that goes into a giant reorg and the level of analysis that goes into a TSI because a bigger job, someone retired, right? So we're looking at actions in that way from a SPO standpoint to be super efficient, because we're like, a lot of you are super lean. A lot of us are doing many different things. So we don't want to be super traditional, but we want to be creative and logical when we're thinking about agency and actions assignments. Now, you will have a contact person that will be your person for questions. That doesn't mean that someone might help out with a different type of action. You will know that though. You will submit, you will know who is assigned to what actions. And that's already happening in the workforce planning world. It'll say, oh, Andrea's assigned to this action in case we needed some one-on-one communication.
And then the question is, where does the agency CFO come in?
Okay, so we're not changing an agency's internal process, right? So if your agency internal process requires certain checks and balances, that will not change. You'll still need those signatures. Some agencies have different levels of approval. How many of your agencies this cabinet secretary assigns every action? I see a lot. There's some that do not. There's some that have designee signature authority. So we're not trying to tell you what you need to do internally. We're here to help you from a process improvement standpoint, though. If you ask us, right, we can say, ooh, is this super efficient to have all these people internally look at this? How long is that taking you? So as we kind of become more efficient with the paper, then our job can be more consulting and talking about how we improve process from all angles, right? We're just talking now from the oversight standpoint. What you do internally could also have some type of facelift. And I'm sure a lot of you are already looking at some of those things, because you can say, wait a minute, does 5 people in the finance division need to sign every action? Or how long is this taking?
Right, and Marco asked that when I say something, he wanted me to come up to the camera. So there was a cabinet training that we did for every cabinet secretary. It was DFA, GSD, and state personnel. And one of the things that I touched upon was about this internal process at everyone's agency. How many people need to touch the action? And it was really a challenge to folks to say, do you really need, in some places, you know, you have like a very large agency, like maybe an HSD that requires more bites at the apple, but how many people really need to touch it? Is it necessary? And so we strongly encouraged cabinet secretaries to look at the processes by which you all on your side, meaning the cabinet secretary, what do they require? And so I'm hopeful that those conversations are happening internally, and if they're not, then, you know, let me know that, so I can strongly encourage the cabinet secretaries again, because Secretary Padilla-Jackson at DFA and we are very keen on reducing the time. We're very keen on recognizing that the vacancy rates are too high. The governor doesn't like it, we don't like it, you don't like it. So how can we streamline any process that we can without making sure that our oversight is not lax in any way, make sure that it runs the traps, but how many traps do you really need to run? That's the key. Okay, back to Andrea.
Yeah, so that's a good point. All right, so I'm gonna close the flow chart, but that in a nutshell is what we're trying to accomplish. And this flow chart basically says what happens if the action gets approved. Sometimes there's actions that don't require DFA approval. Sometimes there's actions that you just need to send to SPO. So this shows you all the tracks, all the scenarios where that can take place. Okay, so let's make this bigger. All right, so let's talk about the compensation form first. We want to label the compensation form. We have compensation action request form now. I think we're saying CARF for short, but if you have anything more witty or more appealing, let us know. What we didn't like is that both of them had the same acronym. So if you're talking to someone, they're like the PARF or the PARF, right? And we're like, oh wait, is it something to deal with compensation, or is it something that deals with classification? So that's why we're just calling them out. separating them in that way. So what I really want to focus on is the concepts of the form rather than here's the form itself, because the form looks pretty similar, but I really want to talk to you about some of the things that we changed and why, so that if you have any feedback or feel like this might be concerning for my agency, you can let us know. So one of the main things that we wanted to figure out for the comp form was give direction to agencies on what we care about, what we actually look at before an action can get approved. And that's all rooted in the state personnel board rules, right? So that should be very consistent. And if you look at the pay rule number 4, and you look at all the actions and the criteria, there it is, right? So we wanted to make sure that we're mirroring and explaining to agencies what is required in order to get this action approved. And that's going to save us lots of time, because right now you guys are filling out what you think I want in the actual justification section, whether that be the manager justification or the HR justification. And so sometimes we'll read that justification and we'll be like, well, wait a minute, where's this or what's that? And that's where the back and forth comes, and that's where the delay happens, right? Because sometimes we're going back and forth on email, and then if I send Joanne an email, I'm like, thank God that's off my plate. Now I don't have to worry about it, right? And then a week passes, and you know what I mean? So that's where we see, when we look at our data or our log, we're like, wait a minute, why are these things taking that long? And we can literally see the back and forth. So that was another big thing for us, is how do we tell them up front what our expectations are, so there is no going back and forth, right? We want to severely limit that. And then I'll talk about this a little bit later, but how do we communicate with each other? How do we create some regularity in the way we consult or talk with our agency, so that they have expectations from us and vice versa? So we have a justification kind of drop down box. So I'll open up the form in a second, but basically when you have a compensation action, you're going to tell us what type of action that is. So let's just say you're doing an in-grade hire. A series of questions will open up that support the in-grade hire. So if you select TSI, only questions that support the TSI will populate. So that's a really cool feature. Cynthia and Naya helped us on the form kind of figure that out, so that it's less dense, right? And then we figured out how many times do you submit more than one action? A lot. There's some scenarios like I've been seeing a lot of in-pay bands partnered with a retention differential to kind of as a band-aid if they need more than 10% of fiscal year. Sometimes you'll help use that tool to make them whole because of the rule, the limitations with the fiscal year and the percentages. So the form, depending on the action, will allow you to pick a co-action, right? So let's say I had an in-pay band and a retention for the same person. It'll populate both of those justification sections for you to complete. Is there any other ones you can think of that you do at the same time? Recruitment waivers sometimes, in grade.
In-grade hire and open pays or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we what we did was we mapped out all the scenarios and then we built them into the form. Some actions only won't require a dual, right? So then you wouldn't have the two options to populate. So I'll show you that in a second. The other thing on the form that we didn't like, that we got lots of questions, was the section where you filled out the employee qualifications. So if you think to the current form, you have to fill in directly related experience, and then right under it, what does it say? Supervisory and management. So we kind of had the advantage when we were consolidated that we could see, or at least, you know, a group of us could see the different ways 33 agencies did things. And that's really eye-opening, because then you could say, oh my gosh, we are so missing the boat here, you know, choosing to consolidate rather than choosing to inform people on how to be consistent and give them those tools, right? So we could literally see that people were adding them both up, counting the experience twice. And so that was affecting the bottom line, right? So if you're not calculating total years of experience correctly, then you might be affecting eternal alignment in the long run. So we ended up doing away with the management supervisory experience and just leaving the related experience, because we think it can capture both. So if I have a manager job, obviously the experience that you're going to give me credit for is related to the manager job, right? So we eliminated that section because we saw that it just wasn't super intuitive and people were interpreting it very differently and then affecting the bigger picture. I talked about the HR recommendation at the pay training a week or so ago. We did away with the HR recommendation. So the compensation form now will have, 3 or 4 questions depending on the action that support your reasoning for that action, right? So the reason why we're doing away with the HR recommendation is we don't want you to have to repeat yourself. We feel like you're going to work collaboratively with executive management or with the hiring manager to support that action in the first place. I don't need you to tell me again. We see it a lot on the classification side because you're working with the manager. Sometimes you're filling it out yourself. People will say, I agree. Like Tanya, you probably wrote that one today, right? That we got. You agree because you wrote all the stuff why you support the action, right? Or I concur. Okay. I don't think it's bad, but I feel like if I was filling out that action and I already wrote everything and I feel like I supported the action, you're either going to have to say I agree or you're going to copy and paste everything you said before, and then the form just is duplicative, right? You have the same information. We see that a lot too. So that's the reason why we took out the recommendation and left the signatures, because those are really important, but we feel like the justification we know is done in collaboration with management, and HR is submitting it. So that was something we hoped that you were happy about. We had one question at the pay training. I don't know if you remember, someone said, well, what if I have something to say? What if I don't agree with the action? So we're hoping by giving you all of the information required that you won't submit us actions that aren't supported, because you're going to be able to say, here, manager, they are not going to approve it unless these 3 things are evident or these 3 things are happening within the action, right? So we're hoping that that helps in that way. If you had anything additional to add, you can always write it on the form or supplement in a different way. But that was the reasoning behind eliminating that section. Same thing with the manager recommendation. So the questions that we're asking is you supporting your action. So we're just doing it in a different way. The proficiency zones, Cynthia and I helped us when she created the form. We have a bunch of different salary plans now, right? So you have the one compensation form, and sometimes it might be confusing because you're like, well, not every single proficiency zone is defined by the same percentage depending on your salary plan. Does that make sense? Like Desiree, what's a good example of one salary plan where an in-grade hire would be 115.5, not 114.6, depending on the spread? Yeah, engineering? Yeah, exactly. So because of the way the pay bands are spread out, it's not 114.6, it's 6, it's a certain percentage of the midpoint. And if you look at the rule, that's how it's written. The rule, the SPO rule doesn't say 114.6 on an in-grade hire. We're using that for the general sal plan because of the spread. Does that make sense? It's kind of confusing and it's kind of mathy, and I'm not a mathy person, but I feel like that sounded good though. But I feel like I have it. But anywho, the form has the different salary plan options. So you can say engineering, and then it'll populate the zones. So then you can clearly see what zone you're trying to hire your person into. Because we had a little bit of an issue at the beginning to be like, oh no, are we missing in-grade hires because everybody's thinking it's 114.6 and they have an engineer hire that's something else. So we thought that that was helpful. Internal alignment, this is something we talked a lot about during our pay training. We didn't want to leave 3 boxes because that was causing some confusion and it wasn't super intuitive, right? Some people were like, oh, I only need to include 3, or I have to include 3, when a lot of times, especially for managers, you don't have comparators because they're so unique. They oversee a division or a unit. So we wanted to make sure that we were being more intuitive. So we're trying to redo that section. The one thing we did talk about too is that a lot of people had asked about DOH's the way that they calculate and make determinations on pay using their, what do they call it? I don't know if it's a calculator, but it's like an appropriate placement spreadsheet. Yeah, calculator. We're going to give you that as a tool or an option, but we're not requiring that, right? So you guys will have your own ways of documenting or keeping track. Electronically is super helpful of what people bring to the table. So if you're trying to hire somebody and you need comparator information, where do you store that as an agency? How do you keep it up? How do you make determinations on pay? We were just meeting with an agency yesterday and they were really excited about that the DOH calculator, but we also want to make sure that everybody knows the pros and cons to that, right? So there is no like magic bullet that's going to tell you what to pay somebody. That's why HR is so great and why it's kind of cool, because just because I have 5 years and someone has 15, that does not automatically mean that the 15 needs to get paid more than the 5, right? You have to know the job. You need to know about a certain type of experience. You need to know about what a specialty experience is, what directly related experience is compared to someone who just has general experience. So those are all things, those are all skills, right? That's why you're in these jobs. So I don't want, I want you to use the different tools to help you, but I don't want you to think, oh, I need that DOH calculator that's going to solve my whole life problems, and I'm going to put every position in there, and then I'm going to know exactly what to pay everybody, right? It's a start, especially for some agencies that were approaching pay in a very different way. You know, like maybe some agencies were saying, okay, you get an automatic 15% promotion or 5%, whatever the case may be. So it'll help you as a starting point, but you definitely need to address pay on a case-by-case basis. Some of you have large chunks of classifications like CYFD. You guys have the social workers, they have a matrix. So that's a little different, right? So you have to know your agencies, know your jobs, but sometimes it really is a case by case. We talked about environment last time. They do a really good job of calling out what is directly related, what is general, and why, like their thought process on how they approach pay. And I think that's really helpful, especially to the managers. And it lets you know that it empowers managers and empowers you that it's not, there is no right answer. It's all about knowing your job, knowing your agency, knowing the skill set that a prospective hire, you know, has. So that's really where like the sparkly stuff is, I guess.
The question came in, it's with IT and attorney classifications, there's a higher spread with them, I guess.
Oh, the IT and the attorney, if the principal zone or the proficiency zones are a little different, we can check. Desiree, you don't think so? Yeah, I thought it was the engineering for sure, but once we share the form too, or even if you look at the midpoints of those pay band, that's another way to see your comp ratios, and they can always call us directly if they need help determining that. Okay, I talked about the signature section briefly. We left that alone so that agencies can be flexible depending on what their requirements are for signatures internally. So we're not going to tell you, oh, you need these 5 people to sign, but you're going to have to make those decisions based on what your secretary wants to see, right? Obviously, if it's an action, you're always going to have your money person sign it, right? So that's not something new, but agencies have a little bit of variance depending on executive management touching everything. It just depends. So I know last administration, that was a big deal for them. They wanted all secretaries to sign every single action. I don't know if you guys remember that. Sometimes it's hard because it's just the way it was and we forget why that happens. One of the main reasons was the budget situation they were in, right? So it's very critical and very important for everybody to see what was happening because of the financial situation. So when you talk to your secretaries, those are decisions now that they're going to have to think about how they want to handle. Just like Pam was talking about internal processes, right? Those are things you can help them with as HR because you've been there for so long and can say, oh, it doesn't have to be this way, or did you think about this? Okay, so any questions on the concepts of the form? Oh, Joe Ray?
Dropdowns for the actions, justification dropdowns, instead of multiple, is it needed 2 or Is it open to like 5 possible actions?
I mean, we literally mapped out every single scenario. So we hope that we covered it. If we didn't, we'll obviously accommodate. But yeah, there you could have, like we talked about corrections last time. They had a retention differential, they had a recruitment differential, and maybe you could have an in-grade hire. I mean, that's 3. A what? You could have multilingual. We don't really process multilingual here, so we didn't put that as a, yes, exactly. Yeah, you know, you're right, because you use the same form. I get what you're saying. Joe Ray? Okay.
This is going to be an Adobe form.
It's the same format as the last form.
Does it allow for digital signature for Adobe? Do you have an account? Or is it actually sign and scan?
Yeah, we don't have digital signature on those forms, right, Cynthia? Yeah.
So also,
if you use your Adobe Fast, if you change it to a print and then you put Adobe print, if you flatten the file, you should be able to print, and create a signature and I can have my IT send you a copy.
So let me just say that with respect to e-signatures, so we have the rules are currently in process to be updated. And one of the sections, we have 2 big blocks of our rules that are up for public comment. And they'll be in conjunction with the board hearing on December 6th, we'll hear any public comment. And one of them is for e-signatures and recognizing e-signatures from a rule perspective. So whether or not you can do it physically is different than whether we can accept it as a rule. So however, we have it in, that's our goal. Our goal is to get the rule updated so that we will have like a nice little celebration and say, yay, let's like crawl into the 21st century.
Yep, pretty much. And so Stephanie, we have been seeing your electronic signatures and we're like following up internally, right? We don't want to hold up your work now, but it's something we're like, wait a minute, because exactly what the director was just talking about, the rules and all the stuff that follows up.
Keyword professors archives and a bunch of like rules associated with it.
it has to be our rules, because we have to accept the signatures to do an action, personal action. But we're really, I mean, December 6th, we don't see any reason why. it
Yeah.
wouldn't pass.
Yeah.
So we're very, honestly, very hopeful we know.
Yeah, so yeah, that's okay. Who I think Celeste is working with you guys, but yeah, we have a question in on that. Okay, any other questions about the concepts, anything you like or anything you have concerns or questions on? Yes.
Question is if you have any alternate recommendations on competition, is there a place to indicate why we're doing that on the top down?
So usually when we see, like if it's an internal thing and DOH does this sometimes, they'll have an alternative recommendation that they'll give to the manager. It all depends on what your internal process is, right? So DOH, like the manager is initiating that form and then the HR people will see it and be like, no, that it should really be, you know, a comp ratio of this, not that. A lot of agencies do it the opposite way where HR is taking the lead and they're the ones giving recommendations on pay. We would prefer that you handle that internally before you send it to us, right? So that you make a determination that your agency is solid on pay and then it comes to us. But if you wanted to write that somewhere on the form, because are you DOH?
Yeah. So
Yeah, you guys usually,
update the form itself. and
yeah.
Send it to you rather than like update it on the paper.
Because your managers are sending it into your like GO, your main office. Yeah. Yeah, we can talk about that. I have to meet with Teresa tomorrow. We can just make sure that she's aware. She was in the pilot, so she supported the form and didn't see that as a major concern. But I think there's places if you wanted to indicate that to the manager that you had an alternative recommendation, you can work through that. Okay, anything else? All right. All right, so I went over some of these in the pay training, but this is just an example of what will prompt when you select certain actions. So if you select an in-grade hire, a temporary promotion, they all require these set of questions to be responded to, right? Some of these things you might be able to get off the job advertisement, and that'll speed it up for you. But what is the primary function of the job? How does the applicant's qualifications compare to the minimum qualifications? And then we talk about comp ratio. How does that support the requested salary? is the hire in line with internal comparisons? So you can see from these 4 questions, literally like the thought process, like what has to go into making a decision on pay. And if you don't have the primary function of the job in front of you or easily accessible, you're not going to be able to make all those connections and say, well, here's the qualifications this person has, and how does that relate to the actual job, right? So that's the first thing. And then when you're talking about where you should pay somebody within the band, you're going to have to know the minimum qualifications and relate it back to how that's relevant. Compa ratio is huge because that tells us where the person is functioning or anticipated to function within their job. Internal comparisons, you're going to have to compare the people that do like work in the same size job. And that's pretty clear in the SPO rule. And then you can let us know. We're seeing lots of agencies now that are taking the, that are looking at compensation and saying, you know what? We haven't been hiring appropriately. We've been doing, and maybe budget's a huge reason, right? We've been hiring everybody in at 100% compa ratio, even people who just met the min quals or whatever the case may be. So this is a good opportunity for an agency to say, yes, we realize that not everybody's aligned, but here's what we're doing. Here's our plan. Here's what we have in place. I wouldn't include any comparators that aren't, that shouldn't be compared. Does that make sense? So don't include any outliers, or you only want to include true comparisons. Any questions on that? Okay, I included one more. This is a recruitment waiver. And the recruitment waivers I thought were really difficult too, because an agency would be like, wait a minute, I have this exception to the rule, and the rule requires, the recruitment rule requires that we advertise for all vacant classified positions. And then it says something like, unless the director authorizes otherwise, right? So it doesn't say recruitment waiver in the rule. It doesn't say how to get an exception to recruitment. Those are just terms that we've used throughout the years. But basically, you just need to talk about the critical business need that is eliminating the reason or the option to recruit. What is the primary function of the job? That's really helpful too, because if someone's asking for a unicorn or an exception and the job is standard, or a job that we see advertised all the time that gets hundreds of applicants, that's going to help you talk with the managers to be like, hey, here's what they're going to be looking for. Here's the questions they're going to be asking. We always want to talk about the qualifications of the candidate that you're recommending. So those questions are very similar to the ones you just saw for the hire actions. Same thing with compa ratio and internal. Sometimes you'll have recruiting efforts that you want to talk about, like say you've tried to fill an attorney job for the past several months and you have found this special unicorn and you've tried to recruit, but you know, circumstances have changed and you found a qualified applicant, so you want to bypass that recruiting option again and fill the job immediately. So that helps sometimes. Do we have a question?
Yes. Question is, does the hiring manager have to answer the question of how does the requested compa ratio support the requested salary?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So to me, that's where the partnership comes into play with you, HR, and the manager. Depending on how close you guys are, or the training they have, or the support they have, most managers are going to look at that and be like, what? Right? But the more you train or explain your managers how our system works, the better we're going to be in the long run, because it empowers them to make decisions. And they don't look at you like someone who knows Latin, right? Like, oh, they'll just figure it out. They know those rules, but the rules are super intuitive, right? They're not crazy. Like what we're asking for is very methodical and logical. So if you can work with them and we can help you understand what the methodology is, the better off you're going to be in the long run. But I wouldn't give a manager something like that and expect them to give me back a quality, something back that's a quality written project if I haven't supported them in that way. Sometimes your larger agencies are like machines and they support their managers in a different way, and managers have different expectations, or there's different things expected of managers in larger agencies because you guys can't do everything, right? Sometimes we've noticed, especially with consolidation, I saw that some of the smaller agencies, that's a big request, right, Leanne? Like for some of your smaller ones, if I was like, tell me about the compa ratio, that's a different world. But the more we help inform people about why we ask those things and what it means, it's really not that complicated once you break it apart. But some of you support your agencies in a much different way depending on size, complexity, what's going on. You know, if I had the secretary asking me to help them with something, I would do that on behalf of the secretary, right? I probably wouldn't be like, hey, Secretary Ortiz, can we talk you know what I mean? I would need to help them in a different way, but it just depends on the action. Okay, anything else? Okay. Okay, so let's take a look. This is I found this on Google, but it's the same picture I used for one of my playlists. So I was like, hey, that's cool. I was very happy. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up, I don't wanna go over, okay, so this is the compensation form. I was more interested in going over the concepts because a form's a form, and I think you're gonna be fine with it. Some of the things that that the staff has done a lot of drop-down boxes so that the form was able to be condensed a little bit and not so long. Here's your action. So let's just say I had a temporary, let's see, retention differential. So this is what's going to create some of the population of the questions. So if I did a temporary promotional increase, you know, maybe I had a co-action that went with it. So that's where all the scenarios start popping up, and you'll see a co-action, right? And so if we missed something, like Joe Ray said, or I can think of a scenario, or Tanya, or there's 5 co-actions, we can build that in. But for now, we just wanted to show you what happens. So this should be very familiar to you. We try to eliminate redundancy, so you can see here you won't have to write the agency under proposed because you've already done that. You're the agency submitting it on behalf of, you know what I mean? So we're not going to ask for it twice. The education, I talked a little bit about this. We're just asking for years of related experience, and that's all connected to the job that you're filling. So if it's a supervisory or a management job, or a job where those things are important, then you are going to count it as related experience. We're not going to break it up that way. Here's what we were talking about with salary schedule. So let's just go to engineering, and then you'll be able to pick the comp ratio, the proficiency zone, depending on where you're hiring that person. So Marco, for your Zoom person, this is where they'd be able to see if it's a different spread or different percentage. So Desiree, see how we were saying 114.6, it doesn't exist here. Do you see that?
So there is, based off of job evaluation, many identified structures, they're not all the same width
Yep.
or range, because some of them don't have, let's say, 4 classifications within a certain salary schedule. So we will identify that from minimum to proficiency zone is about 77% of your range. So once you start hitting a full performance, then that's where you kind of fall into the 115.7 to the 1.
Right.
So there is definitely like a full or matrix calculation that's looking behind all of it.
Yes. So for our Zoom people, Desiree is super knowledgeable on class and comp. So she was literally like breaking it down for us, is how the thought process on how they come up with the percentages and the breakdown. Okay, so we have this in here for now. I don't know that I'm gonna keep it in here, but I wanted to reserve a section for you guys to see that we didn't want to keep 3 boxes for internal alignment. Maybe you attach it to this form. This is where I need your feedback, or I put, you know, it'll populate as many boxes as you need as you fill out internal comparators. This sheet, this link will take you to that spreadsheet that Department of Health uses. So it could be a tool for some of you that are using it or want to use it to track internal comparisons. So how do you feel about this? What is your feedback on what you would like to see permanently? Because we're still in the pilot phase. We're going to pilot this with a couple agencies before we roll it out to everybody. So would you like to see, you know, add your own internal comparisons? Would you want to see the link on the form? This is where your feedback will kind of help me. Yep.
I think if we have the link on the form, it's gonna scare the heck out of my hiring manager.
Yeah,
Because they're gonna see that spreadsheet and go, what in the world am I supposed to do with this?
yeah,
I think it'd be better off if we just, included as many or as few
Yeah.
as we need.
Yeah.
And make that an additional attachment, that's probably a better way to go.
Yeah.
From my standpoint.
I'm thinking so too. I mean, what I really want to get across is just what you need to be thinking about as far as internal comparisons. So I might want to put a little link or a pop out that addresses the rule of all the things they need to care about, like same job, same section. So that's really what we want to get after, because people are interpreting what that means in very different ways. And so we don't want to affect your bottom line as to pay. So that helps me. Thank you. Yep.
A comment from the Zoom room is information on the form, right? It's rather than the link. So information. On
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. Anything else? So I picked 2 actions, and so the questions populated. And this is where you would fill out, you know, if I picked, I guess I must have, you know, I picked a comp action and then I paired it with a recruitment waiver. So I really like that they built the form to just populate the questions that pertain to the action or actions that you're dealing with. I think that will help a manager too, because if we left them all on one form, they could probably easily get stuck in the wrong section. Yes?
So another question came in. Would you like to continue to enter our own internal comparisons, utilizing comparisons by county field office at CYFD has many specialized positions, example, CPS caseworkers of various classifications, all tied specifically to CYFD?
Yeah, so when you start talking about internal comparators, it can get super gray, right? That's why you have to know your agency, know the jobs, know the regions, know the sections, because even though I might have the same type of social worker in one division, when you break it down, sometimes social workers are in different locations or regions in the one section. They pay more for certain sections or regions. So yeah, you need to know, we need to know your agencies, and we're not going to expect you to include something that's not comparable. So that's a good question. So I'm going to scroll down to the signature section. So this is where we just have the signatures, not another box that says justify this action again. And then we left the same hierarchy depending on what you need. So we didn't eliminate anything. We have a section here so that we can partner with DFA and SPO, because right now, this isn't really too concerning for you guys, but for us, when we're talking about efficiencies, we write a totally separate justification on a totally separate form, which requires us to duplicate a lot of the same information, like technical information, like position number, name, percentage. And so for us on our side, we're like, okay, that's an efficiency thing, right? And can lead to errors. We don't want to be repeating ourselves. So how do we justify actions on the SPO side? Because that's something that we can see when we look at our data, as it adds to the time, right? You might send me an action, you know, and it's a TSI, but then on my side, I'm filling out a separate form, and how many days does that take? That's adding to the time it takes to complete an action. So from a SPO standpoint, we're trying to be efficient as well with how we justify our actions. And we feel pretty confident that if we ask you for all the things that is needed universally to get a TSI approved, that I also don't need to regurgitate all of that information, right? Because you've told me and I can clearly check it off and I can see it met all the criteria. So we're thinking from that standpoint as well, because we were just another kind of link in that chain. You would regurgitate on your end, and then I would copy or regurgitate why I'm supporting the action, and we're just all doing the same thing in different ways, depending on who's submitting the action. So that's why we're trying to be super consistent with what, and transparent with what you need to get an action approved, depending on the type of action. So we're hoping that that's gonna help us as well. Okay, any questions? Okay. I like that little guy. He helps me when I run to like the Bee Gees. Sheila's always like, how do you run to that? That's why you're so slow. I just like it. Okay, so let's talk about the classification form. So here's our kind of bigger picture concepts for classification. When we were looking back and saying, okay, how effective are these forms? One of the main questions we asked ourselves is what are we missing from the agencies when they give us back this form? Am I constantly stopping at one thing and being like, help me understand this? Or do I constantly see that managers or HR are like having a hard time filling out all the typical decisions the position makes? That was a big one for us. It seemed like that was kind of like a sticking point for managers when they had to fill out parse. Do you guys agree? Like sometimes some of those sections would be hard for people to think about, how do I answer that, right? What do I say? So that's one of the main things we looked at, is what kinds of questions are we getting, or what information are we constantly having to ask for again, because we're not getting what we want.
So a question came, I think it was in the previous form. It said, for in-grade hires within 114.6%, still only need internal signatures? No need for SPO DFA approval?
No. So for the general SAL plan and for several of the others, 114.6 is the threshold. It's not the same threshold for every single salary plan. So what might be really helpful for the community is that we send that information out with the benchmark, so that you know for each salary plan, what is the threshold that requires it to be sent, Max?
I'm just thinking back on the spreadsheet that lists the max rules and required documents required for each type of action.
Okay.
Maybe that information can be on that form.
Yeah. Okay, so Max, we're super lucky to have Max because he worked at SPO, but so he is familiar with some of the resources that we have here, right, Max? So there's a spreadsheet there that we have that lists different criteria. So he's suggesting that we use a document that we already have and add to it, so that we can add the threshold for in-grade hires on that one document. So towards the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you a guide that we're creating that we're going to share with you once we implement. And he's exactly right. How do we share information so that everybody has it? But I'm going to make it a note to myself so that at least we send it out to everybody so they have the information for in-grades.
Yeah,
Okay.
on the same
And
sort of
let me
question.
hold on one second. So the 114.6, 114.7, whatever the actual number is. So keep in mind that even though we don't have to approve on our side, internal alignment on your side is really important, whether or not I have to sign it or not. 53% of our workforce is represented by a bargaining unit. The unions understand what all our numbers are, and they understand about internal alignment, which has been tough in a budget climate where there's not a lot of money. So we know that when you've been able to bring folks in now in a budget climate that allows people to get brought in at a higher level, you have people who are underwater on the back end. So internal alignment is really important for you, so that your workforce, you maintain a positive morale on the workforce, so that you look and have a plan with respect to those folks who are underwater, which we know who they are in your agency, you know who they are. And that when you bring people in just below the 114.7, if that's where in the general salary schedule that you know that state personnel doesn't have to approve, it's still your responsibility from the HR perspective, and it's still your hiring manager and your secretary's responsibility to understand that internal alignment is on the agency side. It's like, if we don't know about it, we can't help you. But if you keep pumping people in at just under the 114.6, and every new hire, for example, is getting paid at that level, or 1.2, right underneath what my threshold is, you're going to have people who are at this point, who are new, getting paid more than people who have been in the game for a really long time. So that's really important for you. It doesn't, whether or not I have to sign or not, whether or not we know about it or not, is still a fact that people will be at that level. And those are your people, whether they're in the union or not. Those are your people who everyone knows how much everyone gets paid, right? It's not a mystery to anybody. So keep that in mind as you are thinking about internal alignment, thinking about the rules, thinking about using a calculator, whether we're asking you to use a calculator or not. These tools are to help you, help your agency, help your secretary, help your, at the end of the day, and first and foremost, is to help your state employee colleagues. So my 2.5 cents.
So related to the question on requirement for SPO or DFA approval on a threshold, the question is, do the fields for SPO and DFA remain blank for signature, or do you indicate not needed or NA?
So that's a good question. So the agency will not have to worry about those sections. They will only have to worry about their internal signatures. DFA and SPO will work together. Do we keep emailing? Because that's what we do now, right? We save our emails and your DFA analyst will say approved. SPO will send you a template. So we're trying to think of ways to be more efficient. So that was one way, but you would leave those sections blank if you were submitting the action. Okay. I feel like we went off on a, where are we? Just kidding. I started answering my emails. Okay, so concepts of classification form. I briefly mentioned all of the things that we thought about in order to make the form better. One of the main things too that we saw was manager versus non-manager. So if you look at our manager classifications and then you look at our non-manager or non-supervisory classifications, it's like two totally different beasts, right? And we're asking the same questions for two different types of jobs. So a manager is not the same, you can't quantify it in the same way that you can a technician or a non-manager job. So it's really important for us to say, all right, if we're working on classification for a manager, how can we help HR and their leadership team think about how to justify or document what the job does? Because we see a lot of going back and forth, and I talk about it a lot where we're like, it doesn't look like an AO1, or it looks like a staff, and that's where you guys are like, just tell me what to say then, because you know what I mean? And then sometimes I feel like it's the more you write or something, right? So we were working with an agency, and our goal was for the agency just to tell us what the job does. We don't want you to have to go back and write 20 more paragraphs, so somehow more equals the bigger job. We want to give you tools so that you accurately describe the job, so we can have a real conversation and say, actually, it's this or it's a that. There is no other words you can give me other than what the job does. And we're kind of in a spot now, especially with our managers, because if you look at those classifications, a lot of them are they're hard, they're gray. They have these adjectives. We describe types of work and strategic planning. So we wanted to help kind of nail down what we're looking for those types of jobs. The other thing we want to talk about when we implement this new form is, what do you attach to a classification request? And so now that I've been kind of helping out, I can see all the different things that you're sending. Some people are sending a letter signed by their secretary. Some people aren't. Some people, it's just all over the place. So we want to give you a checklist with all the things you need to send with your action. And we don't think that the letter is necessary anymore, because guess what the letter is saying? Everything in the part. And so then I wonder, like, how long is it taking them internally to like route that letter to get signed by the secretary? So I don't even know what that's like. I know it's how long it's taking me once I get it, but those are like the bigger picture things we need to tackle once we get our heads wrapped around being more efficient with a form, right? So that you can start thinking about that stuff. We have lots of things that happen in Share when you're doing like reports to or department changes. Sometimes we think that's insignificant, but really when we're moving, we might be changing like the size of people's job structure. So those are all things to pay attention to. And we're going to give you a checklist too, like what's a reorg? What do you need to attach with a reorg? Right now, all classification requests, you're attaching org charts, right? You're attaching present and you're attaching future. Do you think you need an org chart for every single action? Or is some of it redundant and you're just, forcing yourself? I was talking to Teresa the other day and she's like, what do you mean an org chart? You know what I mean? This is what it is, right? So we have to think through those things to think about how we're being efficient. It's not necessarily one size fits all for every single action, but we also want to be aware of when you think you're doing something small, sometimes it's not small and there's 50 other things that are tied to it. So we want to give you the support and the tools to say, okay, if you're doing a reports to change, did you check what happened to the person that's not going to supervise anymore? Did that person's job change? Did someone's job grow? So it's just looking at it from the past and then looking at it in the future. But we need to give you those tools so that you know what we're looking for, so that we're eliminating the back and forth. Same thing with the signature sheet. We took out the recommendations. When we met with the pilot group, we talked a lot about the essential duties section, and I know Pam, you know a little bit about this, but right now on our compensation form is the essential duties piece, right? Where you're having to say, does the person stand? Do they sit? How often do they do those things? And some of you who have been here a really long time will remember when they added that in. There was a couple HR managers who were adamant, who said, we need this on the PARF, it'll help us. And then some people, you know, didn't have such a strong opinion, but then it got added, right, to what we call now the PARF in the most recent version of it. Our pushback from an oversight agency is, I'm not looking at that, right? I'm trusting that you're telling me that the person sits or stands. I might look at it and see if there looks like an anomaly or some type of flag if you're saying the person stands excessively or something, right? So we were going back and forth thinking, does that need to be on a SPO form? Or if I'm signing that form, or the director's signing that form, is she signing also, you know, agreeing to the essential duties? And we're not really, that's not our role as oversight. So we were thinking, is that the right place for this information? And so we had a really good dialogue with the pilot group about their feelings. So do you have any strong feelings about that? About it not being on the form? About having your own form to document that stuff? Okay, yep.
I'm just worried if it's left off the form that some agencies will
Do it.
produce it, and so when we get somebody who has like a claim or a ADA foundation or some sort of need later on down the road, how do we assess what the essential functions would be for, you know, positions?
Okay.
I think I said that we would put some type of notice that it's not, that's not what we're doing here at SPO, but it is part of the job. And I was the one that was very adamant about putting it on the form because it's part of the job. And it's a one-stop shop. If you have to attach it to FMLA, you gotta give your description, you gotta do it for ADA, you gotta do it for lots of things. And it may not piggyback off of what SPO sees that they need it more of. You could put some type of note on there that it's not necessarily that the director's not approving that piece or something, just, you know, taking the liability off of SPO, but having it there for an agency because it can be a liability if you don't have it.
Okay, so for our Zoom folks, to kind of summarize, we're having some dialogue about the essential functions that are currently listed on the PARF and getting your feedback. From a SPO perspective, we don't, from an oversight agency, have anything to do with approving that information other than maybe calling something out if you there's a typo on the form. That's what's been traditionally happening. Lots of times it doesn't get looked at all. We have some feedback from the audience where they're saying it's very helpful for them if it was left on the form, because then it would ensure that it got completed, and it's a very useful tool when you're doing other actions within HR. We also had someone else say that Leanne mentioned that a recommendation that she gave was to say for agency use only, SPO, however we word that, so that you know SPO is not approving those functions, those essential functions. That's at the agency level, but for convenience, we're housing it in one place. Okay? Yes, and Leanne, you were very adamant. She was. And we had to like walk away and agree to disagree that day. And then we came back and it was fine. But yes.
Because when you don't have it, you don't know what a page it is.
Yes, and so what I appreciate from Leanne is she lives that world. She lives your world. Do you know what I mean? So she knows what she needs to run an agency every day. So I appreciate that feedback now, maybe not at the exact moment you're giving it to me.
But I see where you're coming from. So there's a
We see each other's point of view. Okay, Therese? I know. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So you're not using that. You have your own process. Oh, for those, right. Okay. All right. So for the Zoom folks, we have an agency, DCA, who has their own internal form and process to deal with some of those actions that result because of the essential duties. Okay. And they adopted a form that was developed during consolidation that's been pretty helpful for them. Okay. So let's just like take a poll. Who would vote to leave it in with a caveat that it's agency use only? Who would say, I think we should leave it out and have our own form that we all use that's the same, not everyone have different forms? Okay. And who, I appreciate you, Denise, for being brave. And who says they don't have an opinion either way? Oh, Drew?
So we have one in and 3 outs.
Okay.
4 outs.
Okay. The Zoom people have a different perspective than
5
the,
outs.
oh wow, this is a different point of view in the Zoom
6
world.
outs.
Okay, so the good thing is we're gonna pilot this with a couple agencies, so it'll give us time to wrap our heads around it. We're leaning towards putting the caveat on it now, and then we'll have to check with Pam, or she'll have the last say in case you
7 outs,
disagree.
4 ins.
Oh, yes, okay, awesome. Okay, all right, so let's, I wanna talk quickly about the justifications for the manager and supervisor and then for the non-manager and supervisor. The question that's gonna be asked on both for all classifications, and we're kind of missing it now and I'm having to go back and forth, and most times you capture it in your HR recommendation, but why is this happening? So like Cynthia and Denise came to me about this giant reorg that an agency is doing, and I can see, you know, they're trying to make this a Gen 1 or whatever the case may be, and I'm like, but why are they doing this? Like, what occurred that made this happen right now, so that we understand, like from a point of reference, what is causing the need for this, right? Why are we initiating this change? And that's like the first thing I look for. And so we just put it up front on the form so that the managers can have some perspective and say, sometimes it's easy, right? This person's been doing these job duties, and we just had one for GSD, and they don't match, and here's what matches, right? Or we just had one with April, I forget what agency, but they reclassed a manager down to like a worker bee, and then 4 months later they're like, oops, we shouldn't have done that. We need the manager. So we're like, okay, that helps us. And then, you know, now that it's an administration change, the secretary was on the form. So those are things that they'll think about internally when they make decisions long term, because you don't want to be doing that all the time, right? Because that's going to slow your business and cause issues in that regard. For managers and supervisors, we don't necessarily want percentages like we do the technicians. We want like oversight, like what is their objectives? What are they trying to accomplish? And then financial accountability, if applicable. Sometimes managers or supervisors don't have financial accountability, right? But what we try to do with these questions is mirror the classification descriptor. So if a manager needed help or an HR person needed help, that would be their first line of defense. Let me pull the job descriptor for a staff manager. What is it asking for? So that's kind of mirroring that format. If you're a manager, depending on the size of manager, it's really, it becomes more clear to see what size when you talk about programs, oversight, financial responsibility, how that position affects like the ripple effect, right? What types of decisions, when you talk about tasks completed and we talk about levels of managers, are they working within like a box? Like it's very clear what the expectations are, or do they have a different type of accountability to create something or develop something or to partner or strategize in a different way? So sometimes when we look at managers, we're like, oh, it's confusing. What's an AO1 compared to an AO2? So these are questions to try to help us dissect and make determinations. We're still working on the class and comp side to refine our manager classification. So we're not saying, oh, they're perfect and we're gonna have to live with them forever. That's why you see all the different salary plans, or we're carving out different fields of work so that if you're an HR manager or environmental scientist manager, it's very clear. So, but for a lot of our jobs, they fall into that generic category. So these are hopefully guiding questions that will help us make determinations. without having to go back and forth or saying, oh, I need more. What we really want to do is just tell me, and then we'll go from there, right? Sometimes we'll see, I'll talk to a manager and they'll say, oh, well, they'll rattle off everything. And I'm like, whoa, why didn't you say that on the form, right? And so we're hoping that by reformatting some of these questions that we're trying to figure out what was going wrong there, right? What were we asking that we weren't getting the right answers? But lots of times we'll talk to managers and they'll say something and we'll be like, oh, that's it, right? We just need to put that down in writing. So that's some of the things we're trying to not have to happen so often. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but we're trying to be more efficient. Non-managers, same first question, like what's happening? Give us like a starting point. We like, and the pilot group really liked this, keeping the percentages on the tasks completed for non-manager and supervisory jobs. The SPO people also felt that it was super helpful when they were reviewing classifications to get a bigger idea of time spent on certain functions. For many manager jobs, that's really hard, right? For you guys that are HR managers, your job doesn't work that way. I can't say 35% of the time I do this, or it's if you're a manager, that's not the intent, right? So that's why we kept that for the non-manager supervisors and then eliminated it for the bigger jobs. And then what we tried to do was mirror some of the questions we ask when we advertise a job. So when we worked with you guys, when we switched our processes and then we eventually switched to share, we found that we were missing pieces when we were telling people about a job. So we tried to help managers with the same type of philosophy, like, why does the job exist? How does it get done? To help get the type of information we need to support our decisions. So that'll be familiar to you when you see those types of guiding questions, and hopefully to them too. Questions on this? No? Concerns? Anything that is annoying you now with the form? Is there one thing with the classification form that just bugs you specifically? A lot of things? No? Okay. No, the existing one. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. All right. So I'm just going to pull up the classification form for Marco helping with the Zoom. Same thing, a lot of Cynthia and I helped us with some drop-down boxes, and the questions will appear depending on the box that you select. So let's just create a position. Sometimes we'll have, let's see, let's just create, if you reclass, you can pick if it's down or up. So this information is not unique. This is all the technical information. This is kind of like our first version. Like in reality, this should all be like electronic, and the information should populate from share, and you shouldn't have to be entering. You should be able to enter position number and everything populates, in other words. So that's where we want to go. So we're not like losing sight, just so you know, of like the bigger picture, but we're just trying to make different types of shifts to improve our work, if that makes sense. But we know technology wise, we're behind the curve a little bit. So those are the questions that we just went over that are populating. So they're on the form. I didn't go over direct or indirect, but that's a big deal when we're looking at classification and job size. So that stayed the same. So that's not new. And then the signature section, the justification isn't there because we've included it in the top part. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about that? Eliminating the justification section? Okay. Yeah. And, oh, sorry, Therese first? Okay. Oh. Their expectation. Yeah. Okay, so that's a really good point. Does anyone have, oh, sorry, let me just repeat for the Zoom folks. So we had some feedback from the audience about the employee signature section on the classification form. Sometimes agencies are seeing that it causes a lot of expectation from an employee and they don't really understand all the minutia that happens when you submit an action. Sometimes it takes some time, sometimes there's an alternative recommendation. It's not a slam dunk that this is going to happen. So for the Zoom folks, if you have any, yeah, sometimes it doesn't happen. If you have any feedback on that, chime in. April?
I would say, I mean, can you do it after the fact with the employee signature? I know that was a practice that we did at services after everything was approved. Then they were not.
Okay, some people in the audience are saying, well, how about we get the employee to acknowledge after everything goes through? Stephanie?
For us, sometimes like if we have to change things throughout, like last time, it's been helpful, like if we have to come back and they're not performing the duties, but whatever they agree to
Yeah.
do. So that for us has been kind of beneficial.
Yes, I think some people in the audience are saying whether we do it before or after, we need the acknowledgement. Joe Ray, did you have something?
Required signature, it's needed to be employee, so it's cutting day or January classification, something like that.
But that would be a motion.
No, yeah, that's fine, I'm just saying, that's if it's negative.
You're saying, someone else is saying only require the employee signature for certain actions. I think,
It's a good audit to make sure that you notify the employee that their job has changed.
yes,
I'm not sure if you guys use acknowledgement forms stating your job has been reclassed up. This is your new rate of pay, so that it's in the file and your auditors are seeing that, it matches with insurance. But this would be your checks and balances to make sure, because sometimes people, they get so lost in the process that they don't even know they were reclassed. So this would be help to get back to the employee to talk to them and let them know what came about the reclass. Is there an increase? Is it?
let me ask you guys this. So you obviously need to look at their credentials, right? When you're making the determination, if you're going to reclass them, that they qualify for the job you're putting them in. Would you guys look at what's on file without telling them? You know what I mean? Like look at their resume, because once you ask them for an updated resume, then same thing. The flags are going to be like, oh wow, I have an expectation of something. So do you guys just go to the file and look for the most recent DCA?
Or we ask them for it updated resume.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think it's a bad thing to communicate with their staff to let them know and let them know what's required in approval. I think if someone asked me for a resume, I would want to know
Why?
but I would also understand that there's required approvals through the process.
Okay, so Kim, did you have anything?
Yeah, along those lines, I agree with keeping the employee signature part in. However, I think it should be done after, as well as getting an employee's resume and transcripts later. Because what I'm running into is the same thing. We're giving the employee a hint that something is happening.
Yeah.
And then it can take a while, or it can't happen.
Yeah.
And then it really hurts morale.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of a old school, you don't tell an employee anything about their pay. Until it's
So what we're doing with our guidebooks, when I was hearing you guys talk, and Cynthia, you can help me, but what I think might help for this section is like a checklist. So the employee, like letting you know what the expectations are and the practice, right? So if you're going to reclass the position and the position is filled, you will have to have the person acknowledge it. It doesn't have to happen before, but you know what I mean? Like a best practice so that we're all consistent. What do you guys think about that? Like in our guiding, in our train book, and our training material, and then some type of caveat on the form. Okay, Cynthia, can you write that down, Anaya, so we can add to the form?
Some comments from the Zoom room are employees need to sign off all actions. Might be better after the action's been approved. It is their job and ultimately our expectation of them. Most times they know what we are doing anyways.
There's also a technical,
There's a typo. Where is it?
employee signature required for position info.
Thank you. So, okay, I think that's good feedback, because I feel like that we don't want to cause more confusion, but we want to give you some flexibility to manage it the best way. We all know the bottom line is that the employee will have to acknowledge and they have to know what's happening, right? So, okay, April?
And I was just gonna make a comment that it does help, if an employee is reclass and maybe the new manager doesn't get to their evaluation
Mhm.
for 3, 4, or 5 months, they know right then and there what their reviews are, and they can't say, hey, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that'll be in our guidebook too, you know, what the recommendations are for all of us to be consistent, and then how our QA team follows up, and we, you know what I mean? So that's where we want to go, so that we're all working under the same rules, right? We all doing the same thing, and it's not these different expectations. Okay, so, and we do have a typo, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna get out of this. That was really good. Thanks, Therese. I think that was a good point. So what I want to talk about now is the different tools that we're going to use to help us kind of get things done. And we don't just want to be like, here's this form, and now it's going to solve all our problems, and we're going to be 5 days faster, and the managers aren't going to be frustrated, and everyone's going to answer perfectly. So that's not ideal, right? So what tools do we give you guys to help with that partnership, and what do you reflect on or look back at so that you have support? So I want to show you something that we're developing that we're going to share with you that we're kind of calling our guidebook. We're trying to work with we are working with our consultants to partner with you in a different way to create, we call it office hours, but regularly scheduled meetings where we just hash out everything, right? We meet as a team a few times a week so that the consultants can ask collectively what issues they're having, what questions they have. But what we want to avoid is the scenario I said at the beginning. I send Joanne an email, and then I'm like, not my problem. If it comes back and they complain to Pam, I sent my email 10 days ago, sorry, you know, because that's not effective. But sometimes that's just the way it goes because we have so much work. So we want to say, you know what, Joanne, here are the 3 things I have today. Here are the questions I have. Can I go talk to a manager? Can we figure this out today? Or, hey, I have a meeting with Andrea at 5 or 4, not 5. I'll get that answer to you, and we'll move on. So we want to change the way we're thinking about our work. And so we're on the same team, right? It's about moving the agency forward, not, oh, I'm not going to get dinged now if someone's complaining about where it's at. So we're trying to rethink about how we do our work. And we think that DFA-SPO partnership will help. And eventually, in the near future, once we implement, we want the agency to help us and DFA in the same meeting, right, for long-term strategic things. We don't want to piecemeal these, or, you know, what's happening is the tax and revs working on and pay bands for a whole group of people, and they've been working on this, and employees have expectations, and then it gets stopped because DFA has questions, and then SPO. So we want to say, hey, DFA and SPO, here are the 5 big things that we want to accomplish this quarter or this year. All the other stuff is just work that happens because stuff happens, right? So we want to think about our work differently. So those are the main things that we want to kind of accomplish. So I'm going to just go to the form real quick. This is what you can expect as far as like our starting point for like a guidebook. This is a compensation toolkit. So depending on the action, you'll have the questions again to share with management, but you'll also have all the things that you need to submit for the specific action. And that's going to really help you in classification so that you'll have a checklist and so that we're being consistent. The other thing that we're going to add to this are pop-ups or tips for you guys when filling out the actions. The other thing we've done is add definitions and or usage so that you can have something to reference and we're all using the same information. So what is the primary function of the job? I could say that and I know what I mean in my head, but how do I help you or a manager understand what I mean? So that's what we mean by guidebook, is something to reference, especially going to help you if you have new people. and you can say, hey, help me with this. And you tell them, what is the primary function, or what do I look at for qualifications? And they have something to reference. So that's what the tools we're working on that we will provide you once we implement, so that you have a starting point and lots of materials, and not just a form that you're going to magically fill out perfectly, right? Or whatever. Okay, so let's talk about what to expect, because I'm a little behind. So the reason why I didn't print out all of these materials is because we're piloting with 1 or 2 agencies. We know for sure that Department of Health will begin using this form next Tuesday. And that's going to help us, just because they're so large of an agency, to see what kinks we have on our form. What we do not want to do is like turn on a new light switch for everybody and then have to adjust, right? So we want to do it in baby steps. This is a big deal for you guys, that memorandum that talks about actions and what goes where and who needs to approve certain actions. We've committed to sending that updated memorandum next week. We gave ourselves a little bit of flexibility because I said the week of, not a day. So, but I'm out, we're off on Monday, so that kind of doesn't help us. But we have the draft memo, but that's really going to help you, because that's another guide, right? So if you have a TSI, who does it need to go to? If you have a position that's been vacant or 2 or more years, do you still need to go to DFA? Do you not need to go to DFA? So that's another little checklist for you guys. So the pilot agency will start on the 12th. We're going to try to get 1 more pilot, but we're working on that. And we work with DFA on that too, because we're partners in this. The week of December 2nd, we'll meet with our stakeholders, which is the people that we're dealing with in the pilot. We'll meet with the oversight agencies and we'll say, okay, how's it going? Are we on target? Do we have all our materials, so that we can implement with every single, classified agency that has classified employees? And that's why we have a little caveat, a little star. Our goal would be the week of December the 9th to roll all this out. And obviously you'd get all this information before that I'm sharing with you. But depending on that stakeholder meeting, we want to make sure we feel confident. But we feel like our expectations are pretty reasonable. A lot of our consultants that are working with you are sharing the same types of questions with you. So you are already partnering with managers on the types of information we're going to ask. So we'll have a leg up in that way. Any questions? Because that's what I have for today. 8 minutes behind. Nothing? Are you like happy, or
Are you happy?
or like,
Max is smiling.
oh yeah.
I think it'd be nice to have one format, I guess. Regardless, if currently I work for CYFD, and tomorrow I get a job at corrections, I still know what the expectation
Or state
is
personnel.
when I'm setting up an action.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter where I work.
Yeah.
I'm gonna know what the expectation is.
And we hope so. Yeah. For our consultants, the same thing. We want to have consistency, but sometimes that's not the world we live in, right? We want someone to ask the same types of questions and have these same expectations, no matter who's at SPO.
We don't want to make it a guessing game for anybody. So I really want to thank the entire state personnel team for really putting their heads together. Thank you to Andrea for spearheading. I mean, this is a big project and we understand it's a pilot. So this is why your feedback is really important. You don't just have to say, well, there goes SPO again. You can say that works for us or it doesn't work for us. The whole point is it should be easy for you to use and easy for us to help you. That's the goal. The goal is not to gotcha. The goal is not to slow you down. The whole point of coming together with DFA is to make things faster and more efficient, and to give so that the ball is not hidden. It's not like a black box. It's like, here it is. This is what we need. It's not like, oh, who do you get today? Or my secretary will just go ask Pam. Like we don't need to do that. If we just have the information, you're going to get it from your hiring managers. You guys will know it. You can go back to your hiring managers and say, no, I need these 3 things, and give me the 3 things and we can make it happen. It's very simple in that way.
So we have 50 people online, and there's 4 happies, and there's a few comments to the effect excited to implement together. It'd be great to have SPO and the agencies working together on this. Thank you, SPO. Thank you all again for this. It's great teamwork. Thank you, Director Coleman, and like another happy.
Okay, happy faces, good. So I want to also say, before I forget, so we have 2 new people who joined state personnel this week. Erica Lopez, I don't know if she's in the house, is she here?
Yeah.
Hi, Erica. So Erica joined today. She is our newest state personnel employee. Yesterday, Denise joined yesterday. She's working, she's my new special assistant, so she joined Monday. So welcome, Denise. And we have openings. They're posted on our website. So if you're interested or you have friends who are interested in joining state personnel, you can see like we're doing some cutting edge, cool and groovy things. But I will say again to thank you very much to Andre, great presentation. And any other questions, of course, you know we're here and you know where we live. So thank you, everybody. Thank you.